Welcome to Rotoviz Radio. You are listening to episode 44. My name is John Moore, and with me is Matt Friedman. Matt, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. The 44th episode, the John Riggins episode. I've actually been looking forward to this episode for like the last month just because of how awesome John Riggins was. How much do you know about John Riggins?
I know that he's in the Hall of Fame, but I have a feeling you're about to tell me a lot more.
Yes. Basically the inspiration for the Friday Night Lights character, Tim Riggins, right? That should tell you like almost all you need to know about this guy. But he was an All-American at University of Kansas, drafted in the first round by the Jets. As a rookie, he actually led the Jets in both rushing and receiving, which is pretty amazing. Eventually, he made his way to Washington. He sat out the 1980 season, the entire season, because he wanted a better contract. The team obviously was bad without him. The coach got fired. Joe Gibbs was hired to be the new coach. Eventually, he talked Riggins into coming back to the team, and Riggins said, "I will make you famous." And that actually ended up happening because in 1982, they won the Super Bowl. Riggins, at the age of 33, set single NFL postseason records with 610 rushing yards, 625 scrimmage yards, and 4 consecutive playoff games with over 100 yards rushing. At the age of 33, that's really impressive. And then in 1983, he set the single-season touchdown record with 24 rushing touchdowns in a season. He was an All-Pro, and he did that at the age of 34. Eventually, he retired, and he became only the second player in the NFL ever to rush for 100 touchdowns, the first to do it since Jim Brown did it 20 years earlier. But I think this actually, one more thing, just allow me this digression. What actually might be the coolest thing about Riggins, in 1985, he was at a presidential dinner, and he told Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, "Loosen up, Sandy baby," and then he proceeded to drink to excess and pass out under a table while President Reagan was delivering a speech. Ladies and gentlemen, the John Riggins episode.
Boom.
Yeah, just all around, he's a Riggins. That's what he is. But to get into the episode, we'd like to thank the listener, you, for taking the time to listen to the show. And also we want to thank the excellent guests we had for last podcast, Doug Veach and Jim McCormick. A great episode last week and a great episode this week.
Yeah, this is an exciting episode. We had a lot of fun with these guests. Up first, we have Eric Galko from Optimum Scouting to talk about the Senior Bowl and the NFL Draft, followed by Evan Silva from Roto World to talk about free agency and, of course, Super Bowl 49. But before we get into that, we just have a few more things to touch on from the last couple days in football. Up first, Matt, I want to hit on Deflategate for a second. I know this is beat to death at this point, but here's the thing, is I kind of hope that the Patriots did cheat. And the reason I say that is because it's sort of the ultimate finger to the NFL. Because frankly, who cares at this point? Like, what is the NFL going to do at this point? Your options are basically one, like disqualify the Patriots and give a team who lost by 30 points a free pass into the Super Bowl. That's not going to happen. 2, on the biggest money-making day of the year for the NFL, or at least the highest publicity one, they're going to suspend the Patriots coach and put them at a severe disadvantage and risk a lopsided game. Nope, not going to do that. I mean, who cares? Like, the NFL has no options at this point. And, okay, so take away their first-round pick. It seems like they trade their first-round pick every year anyway. They're probably just like, here, take it. Like, we don't want it. You know, we're just going to overpay that guy anyway and probably draft another Chad Jackson. So what are you going to do to us? And, you know, they've made it to another Super Bowl. And in the same way that right now, does anyone really care about Spygate? Probably not. In 5 years from now, no one will really give a crap about Deflategate. So, Matt, those are my hot takes on that.
Yeah, it's just one quick thing on Deflategate. I have a hard time believing that Belichick doesn't know everything that happens in the building. You know, he's sort of like the emperor in Star Wars. I imagine that he knows everything that happens. So maybe he had nothing to do with it. But I think at a minimum, Belichick certainly beforehand had to know something about the process through which the game balls are handled before the game. It was kind of unbelievable to think that he wouldn't know how that would happen. But anyway, moving on from Deflategate, let's talk a little bit about Marshawn Lynch and how he doesn't want to talk to anybody. It seems a little bit ridiculous that the NFL is threatening to fine him increasingly ridiculous greater sums of money for his reticence to talk to the media at any time in his lifetime. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on this? I mean, it seems like the guy has some sort of social anxiety issues. I guess here's my one thought. If he actually does have anxiety issues and doesn't want to talk to people because doing so makes him nervous and he kind of doesn't know what to say besides, yeah, and I'm grateful, like, I think that's totally fine. It should totally be excused by the league. But, like, does he need a doctor's note for that? Like, either he has this issue and then he should be, allowed to just to be in his like hermetical shell, or he doesn't have this issue, and in which case I guess he has to talk to people. But it seems like it could be solved pretty easily with a doctor's note.
Yeah, and they have the fines in place where it's either, okay, you talk to the media, good job. You don't talk to the media, you pay us a fine. And so if you're a player and you just want to say, oh, I'm just going to pay the fine, to say, well, we're going to up the fine every time until you talk to the media. It seems like a strong arm thing to do. And frankly, it's just BS. I don't know. For as much as the NFL is like all about brain health and, whatever, and concussions and all this kind of stuff, like if a guy had a concussion, he wouldn't have to talk to the media. If a guy has like a diagnosable disorder, why can't he not talk to the media because of that? I don't know. But anyways, moving on to the actual game, the Super Bowl. One thing that I've been fascinated about this entire football season, going back to when we talked to the Moneyline guy way back when, is betting percentages and essentially what the betting market is telling us about a game. And so the Super Bowl line opened with the Seahawks as a 3-point favorite. It is now a pick game, meaning a lot of money has come in on New England. And to that point, I saw an interesting tweet from David Payne Purdom, who writes about gambling for ESPN.com, that 4 times more money has come in on the Patriots than has the Seahawks. To that point, the transactions, so far 75% of transactions are on the Patriots. So let me ask you this, Matt. How do you think Vegas had all those big casinos built?
I have no idea, but not on losing.
Not on losing money, Matt. Vegas makes money. And when 4 times more money is on the Patriots than on the Seahawks, I kind of think that that's one big final score for the NFL before football season goes away. So I think it's a really, really close match, but I'm fascinated by the disproportionality of money that is being bet on the Patriots relative to the Seahawks. Reminds me a lot of on New Year's Day with the college football playoffs, like 10 times more money was bet on Florida State than was bet on Oregon, Ohio State, or Alabama combined that night. Something ridiculous. So when one side is getting loaded up on, that makes me nervous. I'm just on that principle alone going to say that the Seahawks take it.
Yeah, I think that's really intriguing. And it strikes me as the principle that some of the guys have who are kind of high stakes into daily fantasy football. They'll look at salaries and they'll say, like this guy is being owned 10 times the amount that this other guy is, but he's not 10 times more likely to actually have a better game. And I think it's a really similar principle.
Yeah, sort of fade the public. So with that, let's get into the episode. Up first, we have Eric Galko from Optimum Scouting to talk about the Senior Bowl and the NFL Draft. That is a really fun segment. And then following that, we have Evan Silva to talk about NFL free agency and, of course, Super Bowl 49. Matt, let's get into it. Please welcome to the show Eric Galko, who you can find on Twitter at Optimum Scouting. He's the owner and editor of OptimumScouting.com and a lead NFL draft writer for Sporting News. Eric, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks, guys.
Yes, thank you. I know this is a busy time of year for you, but we are very appreciative of your time. So just jumping right in, what were some of the performances that caught your eye during the Senior Bowl or the week leading up to the game?
Yeah, I think overall the struggles the offensive tackle class had at the Senior Bowl was kind of shocking. I think we were kind of hoping that one guy would kind of separate himself a little bit from this crop. And, Andres Peter Stanford, the junior, he's going to be kind of considered one of the best offensive tackles there. But Cedric Aboye from Texas A&M is out with an ACL injury. He won't be back until next camp. So kind of hoping that TJ Clemmings of Pittsburgh or L. Collins would have stepped up a little bit, and all those guys really struggled. I think kind of epitomized as well kind of how good this pass rusher class is in the 2015 draft. And finally, I think the receivers themselves, compared to the cornerbacks, you saw guys like Quentin Rollins, the cornerback, kind of boost their stock, and then a handful of receivers led by kind of Justin Hardy, guys that helped himself out too. But I think the Senior Bowl class was strong on offense and offensive line, running back and receiver, and defensively, I think it had a lot of guys that really flashed this week of practice and kind of made themselves some money and maybe in the first round mix. And this year at the Senior Bowl, we could see as many as 7 or 8 guys be kind of in that top 4 discussion, which would be a huge improvement off of 4 last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then before we get into some of the players, just kind of on a meta level, these all-star games, whether it's East-West, whether it's the Senior Bowl, they get a lot of coverage this time of the year, but can you kind of help us understand what part of this exercise of holding these games is most valuable to you and the scouting community? Is it the game? Is it the practices, the weigh-ins? Is it just seeing guys next to other players, outside of the, comfort zone of their own team? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think to start, it's obviously much more beneficial for the NFL teams than for myself because you get the chance to talk to these guys. And for a lot of scouts, the regional scouts especially, they're going across the country throughout the year talking to coaches, but it's hard to get that one-on-one with those players. And a lot of these regional scouts have so many questions they want to ask these guys about rumors they've heard or the scheme itself, and they get a chance to kind of sit down with these guys even for 10 or 15 minutes and get a good feel for what that guy is football IQ-wise, character-wise, how we'll have a role in the locker room. That's big with the Seattle Seahawks as well. So kind of getting talking to a guy is a big part of that process as well. I know myself and our staff put not a ton of stock into the Senior Bowl, but it's a great opportunity, like you mentioned, to kind of have those one-on-one opportunities side by side with your peers, and especially the Senior Bowl where all these guys are kind of battling for top 100 spots, seeing the velocity of the quarterback by comparison and receivers route running wise and pass rushers and explosiveness, that first step. All those things you can kind of tell on film, and it's easy to see where guys are elite in that area or struggle in that area, but kind of judging where their explosiveness is ranked, where the arm talent really ranks, it's difficult on film because you can't see these guys side by side. So I think those one-on-one reps at receivers in their routes or quarterbacks in their velocity or offensive linemen in their kick slide, all those kind of things, you can really get a feel for where those guys rank in those particular areas, which we do at Optimum Scouting, and you get a better feel for where those guys really rank accordingly in the draft class. So I think for teams, the team stuff and practices and definitely the game has some value as well, particularly for guys, how they come together and how they develop in a game plan. And those one-on-one situations, both off the field and talking with scouts as well as in practice and kind of working one-on-one is a huge value to NFL teams and really kind of see how they stack up off the field and on the field compared to their peers.
Eric, some great stuff there. Let's start to dig in a little bit to particular players. David Cobb was a guy at the Senior Bowl. He's been really productive for Minnesota the last 2 years. He's a big running back, but he seems to get lost in the shuffle. And in some recent rookie mock drafts, he's fallen to the 3rd or 4th round. Do you have any thoughts on him or any other guys who could provide great value in that 3rd or 4th round range of rookie drafts?
Yeah, I think this running back class of the Senior Bowl is one of the better they've had in recent years because usually you see running backs declare early as soon as they get the opportunity to have a big game. So usually the senior running back class lacks a lot of talent. But this year, David Cobb, Amir Abdul of Nebraska, and David Johnson of Northern Iowa all kind of bring a different dynamic to the game, with David Johnson being the best receiver, maybe even an H-back type guy in the NFL. Amir Abdul being that speed guy and a quicker guy upfield, but lacking the pass blocking going on 3rd down. But I think David Cobb is a guy who kind of does all those things well. He's a pass catcher out of the backfield, both on film and at the Senior Bowl. He can run routes down the field. He can pass protect as well, which is a huge value. So I think he's certainly a 3-down option in the NFL. The biggest concern I have with David Cobb is he's not a dynamic player in the open field. His foot speed is good, not great in traffic. I think he's a guy who really depends on his vision and his ability to work through contact consistently. So while he won't be necessarily a sexy running back in the open field and kind of make guys miss, he's a decisive runner who plants and explodes well upfield and doesn't miss too many open opportunities at the 2nd and 3rd level. I think he's going to be comparable almost to a bigger, bulkier version, a more complete version of kind of Zach Stacy, a guy who I think could certainly go into the NFL and be a guy who's a 3rd round pick and be an NFL starter week 1 and year 1. I think over the course of his career, he could have a couple of those opportunities. But I think safely, he's going to be a guy who teams are going to rely on to be an 800,000-yard game-a-year guy if he goes in the right situation. He has some guys to kind of supplement him a little bit and kind of keep that explosive dynamic as well. So I think he's going to be a rock in a team's running back core and in a 2 or 3 back system. I think he's going to be a guy certainly worthwhile in the third round for NFL teams. And depending on where those juniors go and how high they go, he could go as high as the late second or as low as the 4th round in the NFL draft, just based on how those running backs go before it.
Yeah, I think the Zach Stacy comp really hit home. I think that they seem to have similar styles and even similar body types, with Cobb being just a little bit taller and bigger. Transitioning to tight end, it seems that this year it's Max Williams and basically everybody else, but a guy that has started to gain some traction is Delaware tight end Nick Bohl. He's been very productive, especially this last year in his age 20 season. He flashed a few times. What are your thoughts on him, and where does he rank among your ranking of tight ends?
Yeah, I think if you want to consider Devin Funchess tight end as well, he's kind of the middle in between guy. He's a top tight end. Max Williams, like you mentioned, he's going to be in that late first round pick. He's going to be, he's a 32nd pick in our mock draft to Seattle Seahawks. I think that's a perfect fit for Max Williams. But after those two guys, it really goes downhill fast, like you mentioned. I think Nick Boyle was an interesting guy. I was surprised to hear he got a Senior Bowl invite, not because of his film, just because I thought maybe they'd stay away from the small school guys this year as well. But I think Nick Boyle has an opportunity to kind of be a reliable number 2 tight end in offense immediately in the NFL. He's a guy who's a plus athlete. Doesn't always show that in his route ability to gain separation down the field and work in the seam, but like in practice as well as you saw in the game, he has that ability to kind of make plays after the catch and get upfield quickly as well. I think he's a sound blocker, has the bulk and the length and the body type to be an effective blocker, especially as a number 2 guy. So I think he'll get plenty of snaps in the NFL early on in his rookie year. It'll depend on how those teams want to utilize him. Could he be an Owen Daniels type player where he's a blocker as well as kind of having some scheme value? I think eventually in the NFL he could get there. But I think right now teams are going to want him on their roster to be kind of a blocker first with that short area hitch and curl route type opportunity to be a pass catcher and then go from there in the future because he has a plus athletic ability to kind of really work with. But I think overall Boyle's kind of in that 7 to 10 range for tight ends in this class. Another guy I like from the small school ranks is Gene Sifrian from Massachusetts, who declared early. A lot of upside with him as well as a big open field player. But both those guys are going to be in that 4th, 5th round mix for NFL teams with the upside of maybe being a tight end 1 in the future.
We're talking with Eric Galko, who you can find on Twitter at Optimum Scouting. So Eric, I recently wrote about Sammy Coates, who is one of the buzzier wide receivers at the Senior Bowl, and kind of drew the conclusion that he's a boomer bust guy, might be a Stephen Hill and, not have as great a career, or might be, kind of an athletic freak who succeeds more like a Julio Jones. I'm kind of thinking that he gets drafted maybe late first round or early second. What's your assessment of Sammy Coates, and where does he rank in your wide receiver hierarchy?
Yeah, I think you're right as far as where he's going to go when it comes draft time, because he's going to run in the low 4.4s, probably high 4.3s in that range. That's going to be tough for teams to pass on, kind of like Stephen Hill as well in that top 40 picks. I have the comparison for him, and Alex Brown, our SEC scout, kind of agrees. The Terrence Williams of the Dallas Cowboys comparison, because he's really a guy who threatens so well vertically. He has that speed and ability to finish away from his frame and get down the field. I think he has a lot of concentration drops. I think that those can kind of be a big correct in the NFL and kind of still take the top off of defense consistently, but really lacks a lot of separation in his routes outside of those vertical routes, the dig routes, the post routes, the quick hitches. Doesn't really get a ton of separation. That's where he's going to really lack value early in the NFL. So we currently have a 3rd round grade on him because of the inconsistency with his hands and finishing in the mid part of the field and even vertically on the field at times due to concentration, as well as kind of his lack of route development at Auburn and even the Senior Bowl during practices as well. I think it's why you got 3rd round grade on him. That Terrence Williams comparison is still there. So I think he can have value as an outside receiver. I don't think he'll ever be a number 1 receiver in the way Julio Jones is, but I think he has a bit more polish to his game and nuances of getting some separation outside of what Stephen Hill did. So I think he falls somewhere in that spectrum of a Terrence Williams type guy. And I think he's a 3rd round grade for us, so I'll probably hold steady throughout the process. I think the 2nd round area is likely where his value maybe is at highest, but like you mentioned, the 1st round wouldn't be totally out of the question if he has the combine people are expecting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then so sticking with wide receiver position, recently at Optimum Scouting, you had a mock draft where Amari Cooper, Jalen Strong, and Devontae Parker went in the top 12 in that order. Pretend for a moment that those 3 were in the 2014 wide receiver class, which was much ballyhooed as being one of the strongest in a really long time. Where would they stack up? How would you rank them against, Sammy Watkins, Odell Beckham, et cetera?
Yeah, without playing the kind of reactiveness of looking back at our rankings saying, well, Odell Beckham Jr. would have been a lot higher. I think based on our grades and what they were final last year, we had Watkins and Odell Beckham firmly as first-round grades and in the mid to high range of those guys. I don't think any of the receivers will be touching those guys in terms of our grades at the end of the year, with Dan Watkins being our top-rated guy and Odell Beckham Jr. being our number 2 guy last year. But I think after that, it gets kind of muddy. I think you see the Mike Evans upside, downside, same thing with Jalen Strong. We had concerns about Mike Evans, and he was a bit low in our rankings than most guys, just because of the fact that with the character concerns as well as would he play well without Johnny Manziel and will he continue to develop in the NFL. He certainly showed he can do that in the NFL this year as a rookie, but we'll see how he kind of progresses from there. I think really these guys, Amari Cooper, Devontae Parker, and Jalen Strong all kind of fall in that range where we had even the Marquise Lees, the Brandon Cooks, and the Allen Robinson of Penn State, kind of all in that range where they're kind of second-round guys, firm second-round guys who could be maybe a first-round pick. Last year's class saw the first-round loaded receivers and kind of dropped some other guys. I think this year's class, which is weak across the board, I think we'll see all three of those guys, Amari Cooper, Jalen Strong, and Devontae Parker, as well as Kevin White, who's been a favorite of many people in the media, as all being in the first-round range just because the class overall outside of receiver isn't very strong, and teams are looking for safe, reliable first-round picks. I think Jalen Strong's a guy who deserves a lot more attention. He's really a Mike Evans-type player with the same type of explosive ability and vertical ability. I think he should be considered a lot higher from people in the media from what I've heard. I think he'll be a first-round pick as well, but really Amari Cooper and Devontae Parker aren't sure of hype as of right now.
Totally agree with you on Jalen Strong. Transitioning from wide receiver to quarterback, it recently came out that Marcus Mariota has a hurt shoulder. He might not throw at the combine. What do you make of that? And kind of where do you stand on the Mariota versus Jameis debate?
Well, as far as Mariota's concerned, it looks like all that matters is his pro day based on where Teddy Bridgewater went last year. So I guess we'll just wait for the pro day and see how he does there, if he's worth the first-round pick or not. But no, I think overall for Mariota, throwing at the combine is not going to be a big concern. He'll be there. He'll start an interview with teams, and his measurements will still be there for the most part unless he chooses not to run. But I think we'll have some firm measurements on where Mariota stands. I think the combine throwing session, the benefits of the combine throwing session when it comes to quarterbacks is for many teams, especially for the junior class, and we saw it with Mark Sanchez especially, that's the first chance that GMs, head coaches, offensive coordinators really get a chance to watch these guys throw on air without having the pads on and film on. And that's a unique experience because the guy really impresses there. A team can kind of fall in love and have that first impression be the best one. Happened with Mark Sanchez, happened with Joe Flacco as well, with Mark Sanchez at his pro day and Joe Flacco at the combine. That's a huge value for these quarterbacks. But I think for Marcus Mariota, the concerns aren't about how will he throw on air and will he make the accurate throws. I think people can assume he can make those accurate throws in due time in the NFL. It's all about can the system transition. So as long as he's there for the interview process and he can go with those teams and speak with them, and I'm sure every team that talks to him will put him up on the whiteboard more so than talking to him about his character like they will with Jameis Winston. I think teams will kind of get flushed out a little bit. And I think overall, from the media perspective, we'll get a lot more on how these teams really feel about Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota after the combine, because after teams get a chance to talk to these guys with Winston about his character and his background, as well as his baseball aspirations, and then Mariota get him on the whiteboard, I think teams will feel much more comfortable which of these guys is worth the first overall pick, which one's worth the top 10 pick, and maybe one of those guys maybe falls out of the top 10 altogether. As far as where I stand, I think Mariota is a safer player than Winston in terms of off-the-field concerns. Things not related to football, like mostly Jameis Winston's baseball aspirations, as well as Mariota's athletic ability to play early on in the NFL because he's a great athlete and kind of make things happen without being part of the offense is why I think he's a safer player than Jameis Winston for the most part. I think he certainly has more upside with his athletic ability, his arm strength, probably being on par, if not higher, than Jameis Winston, and his running ability as well. I think in both respects, Mariota is a better player than Winston as a safer pick and an upside pick. That's why I think Mariota is a guy I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will take at first overall, and Jameis Winston will be kind of in the middle of that top 10, top 15 range where teams will take a chance on him as well. I think Winston as well kind of being underappreciated, that Winston needs some work too. His footwork's still off. His base is off when he makes throws down the field. He doesn't reset his feet very well. Made a lot of mistakes this year. His ball tends to go right when he's on the move. It tends to flutter a little bit on the outside. So I think Winston isn't really as clean cut and as NFL ready as people in the media maybe seem to think he is compared to Mariota. Both guys need work, and if I had to pick one guy to work with, I generally choose Mariota over Winston, especially in the top 10 picks.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially when you maybe consider that Winston had some regression there in his second year and didn't look quite as clean as he did when he was winning the Heisman. Optimum Scouting provides services for AFL and CFL teams. We've gotten questions about Duron Carter, son of Chris Carter. transitioning to the NFL. What can you tell us about Duron Carter, and do you have any idea of what we could potentially expect from him in his first NFL season?
Yeah, I actually had a chance to speak with some CFL teams in the past few weeks about a few guys that are Canadian born as well as kind of come from the CFL to the NFL, and Duron Carter certainly at the top of that list. And at the CFL this year, I think teams saw the effort wasn't an issue with the CFL this year. He certainly bought into the system and really chose the CFL to really blossom and play well at the CFL level. He was one of the best receivers in Canada this past year, and I think at scouts and the CFL level were certainly assured that he's going to be an NFL guy after this year as well. They did say, however, that kind of the concerns he had at Ohio State or Alabama or Florida Atlantic were all kind of what you'd expect. They weren't any fabricated stories. He just didn't get along well with the coaching staff, kind of assumed too much about what he was. And while he seemed past that in Canada this year, that seems to be kind of still regurgitating things, saying, well, will that go back and revert itself to those old days at Ohio State and Alabama once he's in the NFL? So despite those character concerns, I think most people in Canada seem to feel he'd be, a number 3, number 4 receiver for most teams he signs with, whether it's the Colts or whether it's the Minnesota Vikings, which seem to be the two favorites for Duron Carter. I think he'll be probably a 3 or 4 guy. I think in terms of looking at him as a draft pick, he'd probably be worth a 3rd or 4th round pick in this draft class as well, kind of being that number 3, number 4 guy with a lot of upside. So teams certainly realize the upside, what Duron Carter can bring to the NFL and be an eventual guy who could be an outside receiver. I think right now, in terms of the draft grade, he'd be a 3rd or 4th round pick with a lot of upside. I think teams would kind of feel the same way when they sign him and get a chance to get him in camp and see how he works for their team in the future.
Hey, Eric, this has been a lot of fun. Really enjoyed what you've had to say here. If this is someone's first time listening to the show, hearing about Optimum Scouting, how would you describe your site to them? What are some of the resources they could find there, and what should we expect to see from the site in the near future?
Yeah, Optimum Scouting, we have guys across the country. Alex Brown and Mark Dogarian, 2 guys with me for a long time, both kind of going their respective places probably after this year. But a well-trained staff and a focus on really scouting first and opinions kind of secondary, and kind of putting together what we think and what our scouting reports are, and let you kind of be the judge. That's kind of what the mantra I've had for Optimum Scouting since its inception 7 years ago, is kind of give the information scouting-wise based on what we've seen on film and what we've heard, and kind of let you make the decision on where you're going as well. So in the future, certainly the mock draft will be a big part of the draft process, but a lot of scouting reports, a lot of insights, and what we're going to work on a lot more this year is kind of using players in this draft class, situations or player comparisons, and kind of what that says about the draft process in general. Before we had, last year, for example, we had an article about Aaron Murray and kind of what size really means and how he can work despite being undersized in the NFL, and will that work or not. I think kind of focusing on niche areas of the NFL draft, and we want to focus on this year, and hopefully educate and work with people that are viewing the site to kind of get a better understanding of the NFL draft process in general. But along with scouting report, the usual NFL draft guide, we have plenty more coming the rest of the draft season.
That sounds fantastic. I really look forward to seeing what you have coming up. I've really enjoyed the bowl, like the All-Star game coverages, for Senior Bowl and Shrine Game and all that. Eric, thank you so much for your time. We will be in touch.
Appreciate it. Thanks again, man.
Please welcome to the show Evan Silva, who you can find on Twitter at Evan Silva. He is the senior football editor for RotoWorld. Evan, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. It's good to be back with you guys.
Yes, and thank you for your time. It's always a privilege to get to talk football with you. So up first, the Pro Bowl was just this last weekend. We've now had 2 years under this fantasy-like format in which teams are selected by former players. What are your thoughts on this in comparison to the old NFC versus AFC format?
I think it's even worse. And actually, slightly funny story. I do the RotoWorld news blurbs now on Sundays after the season, and I was supposed to do a blurb about the Pro Bowl. Literally fell asleep during the first quarter of the game, and had to blurb it the next day, which was a little embarrassing. But we still got the blurb up, and that's what counts.
Indeed. And, my housemate actually had an interesting point because he was like, at least before you knew who was on which team, now it's like you need a cheat sheet to even like keep track of your favorite players. And yeah, I agree. It's pretty painful. Speaking of your content over there at RotoWorld, you recently just had an article about free agents for this upcoming off season. One thing in particular that looking at the running back position guy like CJ Spiller was ranked number 2. He's a little bit older, a little bit smaller, injury history, etc. Does the ranking of him kind of indicate your expectation of this free agent class in general, as far as it being a little bit down, or do you actually have, good things to say about CJ Spiller at this point?
Well, yeah, if you just look at the running back class as a whole, it's kind of DeMarco Murray and then everybody else. The other guys that I would have considered placing second among the free agent running backs were Mark Ingram and Ryan Matthews. And I think that CJ Spiller, Ryan Matthews, and Mark Ingram will all kind of end up in the same monetary range. And if you read at the start of the article, it's that we're trying to rank the players based on where we think the NFL will value them and what kind of contracts that they get. So that's kind of the starting point. And that from then on, it's just a guessing game. But I think that CJ Spiller, Ryan Matthews, and Mark Ingram will all end up in that $3 million to $4 million per year range. And I mean, I still happen to think pretty highly of CJ Spiller just purely as a runner. I know that there are negatives about him. Like you mentioned, he's not a big running back. He's not a running back that you want to give the ball to 25 times a game. He's not even particularly skilled in the passing game, other than design plays to get him the ball into space. And he's kind of old. So I don't know how many years he has left in the league, but I do think he's got 1 or 2 more years of if he goes to the right situation, he can be a high impact player. There were rumors last offseason that the Eagles wanted to trade for CJ Spiller, and I think we would all enjoy seeing CJ Spiller in Chip Kelly's offense.
Mm-hmm. And just to that point about the right situation, I know this is a little bit tricky because this running back class is really deep and the draft will impact some things, but just off the top of your head, what are, a couple teams that you think might be good situations for those players or for the rookie class?
I think Dallas makes some sense for Mark Ingram. I know that Jason Garrett was very high on Mark Ingram coming out of school. If the Cowboys aren't going to meet DeMarco Murray's contract demands, they're going to want a running back who can carry the ball a lot. And although Mark Ingram has had some injury issues and he had more this past year, in a given game, he's definitely a guy who can carry the ball a lot. And I think he'd probably look pretty good behind that Dallas offensive line. A lot of running backs would. But I don't think I think he'll probably cost about half as much as DeMarco Murray. CJ Spiller, I would like to see him in an offense that, utilizes him to his strengths. And Philadelphia, I think, would do a good job of that. I also think that it makes sense for him to reunite with Chan Gailey and the Jets. That's still a team that has a lot of question marks at quarterback, is going to need to run the ball. And I think he would be a big upgrade on Chris Johnson, who I think the Jets should pretty easily cut ties with. CJ Spiller, Chris Ivory, I think would be a pretty big upgrade on what they have there in place. With Ryan Matthews, he's an interesting guy because, he's another guy kind of like Mark Ingram who, highly touted coming out of college, has that workhorse build, has shown the ability to carry the ball a lot, in a given game and be successful doing that, but, has been injured a lot. So, I think that this free agent running back class is a little bit better than last year's when Ben Tate and Toby Gerhart were the big signings. But, I think that they'll experience a similar, in terms of the contracts that they'll get. I don't think that they'll be getting big money. DeMarco Murray might be the exception.
Hey, Evan, I really like that mention of Mark Ingram potentially going to the Cowboys. I think not only would that be a good fit, but that's also something I could actually see happening. And a quick aside, you had mentioned the Pro Bowl blurb earlier. I noticed that in the most recent Spygate blurb, the blurber made an Ollie North reference. I don't know exactly who it was that made that blurb, but just a hat tip. It's not every day that you can mix into a football conversation an Iran-Contra affair reference that still makes sense. So really hat tip there. But transitioning on to other news, In the game called I Can Ruin My Life More Than You Can, Josh Gordon, with his most recent suspension, has overtaken Justin Blackmon. What do you think we can expect from these two wide receivers in the future?
Yeah, this is a really tough question with Josh Gordon. He'll be 25 and a half. He led the NFL in receiving yards at age 22, and he'll be 25 and a half the next time he's eligible to play. And who knows what will happen to him, during his off time. It's pretty clear that football is not his number one, and he's not going to be playing for a while. So I don't know what to expect from him. If I owned him in a dynasty league, you can oftentimes use an IR position for guys that get suspended, and hopefully, your league allows for that. Otherwise, he's going to be. I think people are going to find him difficult to hold on to. I have no idea what to expect from him. Justin Blackmon checked himself into a treatment facility last November. He doesn't have any pending arrests. He's dealt with all that. The Jaguars have sounded optimistic about him, potentially returning to the field. Rotoworld had a blurb on him today. He needs to apply for reinstatement within the next 5 weeks. And then after he applies for reinstatement, Roger Goodell will have a 60-month window or a 60-day window to decide whether to let him back in the league. But it seems like he started to check the boxes, and he's still, I think, 25 years old. So he should have some good football ahead of him. I would love to see him back out on the field, man. He is a yards after catch monster, and I think he'd be a really welcomed addition for Blake Bortles, who kind of had trouble completing passes down the football field and might really benefit from a guy who can catch those high percentage routes and turn them in to chain moving games.
Yeah, moving to the other side of the ball. This last weekend, the Saints signed shutdown Canadian Football League cornerback Delvin Breaux, and that's actually maybe the coolest last name ever. And its spelling ends with EAUX. So New Orleans is the perfect place for him. Anyway, in recent years, we've seen an increasing number of players from the CFL migrate to the NFL. What do you make of this trend and the players who make the transition? And in particular, do you have any thoughts on wide receiver Duron Carter, who's also looking to make that jump?
Yeah, some guys have been successful, others haven't. Cameron Wake has been highly successful. Another guy who was kind of ballyhooed coming out of the CFL was Emmanuel Arsenault, another EAUX, and he did nothing in the NFL. So we'll see. He was a small wide receiver. Duron Carter, of course, is a big wide receiver, 6'4". I think he recently measured in at 6'4" and 198 pounds. If you go to NFL Draft Scout .com, it has measurables on him that are, I think, from a while ago, and I don't know how up to date they are. The measurables on NFL Draft Scout aren't, they aren't anything that would blow you away. I've watched Duron Carter, play just on highlight reels. So take that with a big grain of salt. It's just the good plays. But it looks like he's got really good ball skills, like his dad, who was known as, he had, some of the best hands in NFL history. And he's a lot bigger than his dad. He had a nice market share on the Montreal Alouettes. He did some work in the return game. He was a star in the CFL, and I think his signing bonus will probably be in the range of $75,000 to $100,000, which is essentially the cost of a 6th or 7th round pick. So I think that he's just an interesting guy to monitor. I don't think anybody's coming in, expecting him to come in and blow away the NFL. But he has a very recognizable name. He was a big recruit coming out of high school, and he pretty much dominated in the CFL. So all good signs, and he'll get a chance. And he's a big wide receiver, and he can run a little bit. So I think he's definitely interesting, and he should be rostered in all dynasty leagues. I was actually able to pick him up off the waiver wire during the season. In one of my leagues, and I know in another one of my dynasty leagues, he will be entered into the rookie draft, and my guess is he'll come off the board like late second round or early third round in the actual rookie draft.
We are talking with Evan Silva, who you can find on Twitter at Evan Silva. He is the senior football editor for Rotoworld. So let's get to the big thing that's happening this week, the Super Bowl. We might as well just get it out of the way. Evan, do you have any thoughts on Deflategate?
I really don't, and you can, people can go get other people's opinions on it. The most interesting thing that I've seen about it is that it may have led to the reduction of fumbles if the Patriots had been doing this over an extended period of time, which no one can really prove. But that point was brought up by Warren Sharp. He's at Sharp Football on Twitter, and that was the most interesting thing that I saw from Deflategate. Other than that, and everybody has their opinion about it, and people use it, to push their narrative that the Patriots aren't really that good. I happen to think that the Patriots have been very, very good for a long time.
Mm-hmm. And just to elaborate, I think Evan is referencing there was an article that recently came out about carries without a fumble for each team in the NFL, and the Patriots were easily the best team. I think it was 180 some carries per fumble compared to the next best team, which was under 100. So that might not be exactly right, but it was an interesting study that just came out. Getting into the specific matchup, in the Super Bowl, the Seahawks and the Patriots, one thing that has, if anything, plagued the Seahawks defense throughout the year is their performance against the opposing tight ends. What is your thought about how Gronk matches up against that defense and how that'll play out?
Yeah, and people made a kind of a big deal about that during the regular season. In fact, the Seahawks are pretty tough against tight ends. They allowed the 8th fewest receptions to tight ends during the regular season and the 4th fewest receiving yards to tight ends in the league during the regular season. There was a span early in the year where they gave up a bunch of touchdowns to tight ends. Actually, over their last 10 games, the Seahawks have allowed just 1 touchdown to tight ends. And I kind of wonder if the Seahawks were, because Cam Chancellor, their strong safety, was injured, playing it significantly less than 100% early in the season. And I wonder if their red zone defense kind of took a hit at that time, and teams, targeted the tight end, who is often covered by Cam Chancellor in the red zone. And, the result was, just a lopsided number of touchdowns, early in the year. But lately they have not been vulnerable to tight ends, at all. I mean, they're one of the toughest teams in the league against tight ends. But it's Rob Gronkowski. So, he's not exactly an easy guy to stop. But I think that if the Seahawks have a weakness right now at this stage of the season, it's on their interior defensive line. In the playoffs, I know it's just a 2-game sample size, but they've had some trouble against the opposing running games. Eddie Lacy had some really nice runs in the NFC Championship game. James Starks ripped off a long run. Jonathan Stewart had some really nice gains. So did D'Angelo Williams. They're allowing 4.8 yards per carry to running backs over their last 2 games. And they lost Brandon Mebane, their nose tackle, in November to injured reserve, and they lost Jordan Hill, a promising player, in January, both defensive tackles. And if you watch the games, the defensive line for Seattle can get moved. And, you can reestablish the line of scrimmage against Seattle's defensive line at this stage of the season. So I'm kind of interested to see how the Patriots will attack them. I'm sure there will be plenty of Gronk, there will be plenty of Edelman, but I'm kind of curious to see if they fire up LeGarrette Blount and they attack what I think is the weakness on Seattle's defense. And I kind of like LeGarrette Blount as a sleeper Super Bowl MVP pick.
It's really intriguing, and especially great point about Cam Chancellor being injured earlier in the year. Moving to the other side of the ball for the Seahawks, Russell Wilson's two starting wide receivers both entered the league as undrafted free agents. One of them was intended on all of the targets that turned into interceptions for Russell Wilson last week, and the other one, at best, is basically a discount version of Randall Cobb. What can we reasonably expect in the Super Bowl out of Jermaine Kearse and Doug Baldwin versus Darrelle Revis, Brandon Browner, and Kyle Arrington?
Yeah, so the problem for the Seahawks wide receivers, especially on the perimeter, this doesn't apply to Doug Baldwin as much, but is that they struggle to get open against man coverage, which the Patriots play a lot of man. And the Seahawks, their offensive coordinator, Darrell Bevell, doesn't do a lot of like stack or bunch or motion to get the wide receivers open. So, I don't think Jermaine Kearse is going to go out and light up, Darrelle Revis. I think that the Seahawks, if they have any big passing plays, they'll come off of scramble drills with Russell Wilson. I think that they'll, really try to pound with Marshawn Lynch. I think ultimately it'll be a low-scoring game. The Seahawks have a weakness offensively, and that's their wide receiver core. And, they don't match up well in the passing game with New England. So I think that the Seahawks will really they'll want to rely on their running game, and they'll hope that Russell Wilson can make some plays, some improvisational plays that result in big games.
Yeah, you just mentioned Marshawn Lynch right there. What do you think that the Patriots defense will do to try to stop him?
I don't know if they will do anything different from what they usually do. They've played, pretty good run defense since they, turned to Dante Hightower and Jamie Collins as their primary inside linebackers. They struggled for a bit right after they lost Gerard Mayo, and then their run defense has pretty much been solidified since then. I don't know that they will do anything different. Maybe they will use, maybe they will, shoot Jamie Collins through the A gap a little bit more than usual. Maybe they will drop down, Pat Chung, because the Seahawks aren't really threatening at tight end. Maybe they will use Pat Chung, the strong safety, to come down into the box a little bit more. I don't know. That's difficult to say, but definitely stopping Marshawn Lynch will be a key to their defensive game plan. I don't really feel comfortable trying to guess what Bill Belichick's going to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of the train of thought that I've always understood from that organization is that you stop the other team's best option and then, take your chances with them beating you on their plan B. And so, I just hearing you talk there kind of feels like, between the receivers sort of, taking care of themselves to an extent, against Revis and Browner, presumably, if they just really try to load up and stop Lynch and just say, okay, Russell Wilson, if you're really, the new Mr. NFL, come beat us, and that might be an interesting thing to watch play out. But one last question, then we'll let you go. Thanks again so much, Evan. We really appreciate your company. Right now, Vegas has an over-under of 48.5, and the game is basically a pick 'em. What's your bold prediction for how the game will play out?
Yeah, I would probably bet the under. I don't see either of the offenses lighting up the opposing defense. So I would go under the 48. That's a fairly aggressive over/under, and then it's truly a pick 'em. I think that if I had to pick a team to win, I think that the Seahawks are a little bit more talented from top to bottom, and I would probably go with them. But I think it would be an interesting parlay if you wanted to roll, pick the Patriots and parlay with Garrett Blount as the Super Bowl MVP.
I like it. The LeGarrette Blount Super Bowl MVP is not a light statement to make. That is bold, and we appreciate that, Evan. Thank you again so much for your time. We will be in touch.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Rotoviz Radio. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast through your favorite directory. Also, if you're on iTunes, please let us know how we're doing by stopping by and leaving a rating and review. Looking ahead to next week, we've got 2 great guests lined up. We've got Rumford Johnny and Matt Miller, who you know on Twitter as NFL Draft Scout. It's going to be a great episode. You won't want to miss it. We will catch you next week.